What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2011 Audi Q7 TDI. Today on the Q7 behind me, we're going to be covering how to do a transmission service. This is also going to be applicable to your Cayennes and Touaregs equipped with the same 8-speed Aisin transmission. We're going to be using our OE fluid for the transmission. This crosses over from the Volkswagen Audi recommended fluid. As it is an Aisin trans, we're going to be using the Aisin OE fluid. We have 13 liters here. That's what it's going to take from a dry fill. I don't believe we're going to be using all of them, but it's always good to have more than not enough. We're also going to be measuring what comes out of the transmission just to have a rough idea of how much to put back in. We're using an L-ring gasket for the transmission pan, an OE filter, as well as a new crush washer and a new drain plug, fill plug. We're going to be doing the same thing out of both ends. We recommend you do this service every 50,000 miles. Don't stretch it too far past 70. The Q7 behind me is actually at 107,000 on its original fluid, so it's absolutely overdue for a service. Before we get started on this DIY though, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. Needed for this job is a torque wrench to torque down your hardware, a 3/8 ratchet, a 1/4 inch ratchet, a 10mm wrench comes in handy. We'll show you why in just a little bit. We have both a extended and a short 5mm hex bit on a socket. One is on a 3/8, one is on a 1/4 drive. We have two different size 10mm sockets. We have a regular 3-inch extension as well as a swivel extension. Again, we'll show you why those are going to come in handy with the wrench when we get towards the front of the pan. There's some hard to reach hardware there. A pry bar, you can substitute that for a flathead screwdriver. And then to fill the transmission, we're going to be using some CTA tools. This is a pressure pump 7400 and then the adapter 7414. That's going to thread right into our pan. You can use a different combination. You can use something like a fluid transfer pump. However, this will be easy. We can fill it up with the quantity that we want of fluid and just kind of pump it and turn a valve. Now that we know what tools we're going to need for this DIY, let's get started on this job. We're going to be working under the lift today. However, this is a job you can do with a couple floor jacks and jack stands. The only takeaway here is that the vehicle remains level, especially when you're filling it up so that your fluid levels are correct. We're going to start by removing the splash shield underneath here. We are going to start with 8 10mm bolts, which will get us to about this point right here. And then from there we can decide if we need to remove the most forward shield or not. So 8 10mm, let's go ahead and zap those off. Get those off. We're going to go ahead and pull it backwards just a little bit. And to the side here. Boom. Now with that splash shield off, let's grab our catch pan and get ready to drain this fluid. Alrighty, we have our drain plug towards the back of the transmission that we're going to go ahead and remove. For that, you're going to want to use a 5mm hex bit. I'm using a 5mm hex on a socket, 1/4 inch specifically. Depending on where you are, sometimes these can be a little crusty. You want to make sure that the bit goes all the way in. You don't want to accidentally strip it. I would rather have to wrestle that out than to have to wrestle out a stripped bolt. With that nice and snug, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch ratchet and break that free. It's only 12 foot-pounds usually, so it shouldn't be very tight. Now what I'm going to do, or attempt to do, is pull this out and then catch as much fluid as possible. You might catch me plugging it with my thumb while I empty this out just to reset the pitcher. And then we'll let it drain out, do its thing, and go from there. All right, now that we have come down to a small dribble, the next step is going to be to remove the inner tube that comes part of the pan. It's just a plastic green tube that's hand threaded in there. Same 5mm hex will get it out. That's also what kind of helps keep it level in the pan when you refill everything. I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. I'm going to stick this extended 5mm up in here and then just thread it out. Before that green plug came out, we had just about 2 liters of fluid in the pitcher. We should see that increase drastically now. All right, so at this point we've got about 3.25 liters of fluid. What I'm going to go ahead and do is insert the old drain plug back in, just so I have some control over where everything's going to spill out of as we remove it. So I'm going to plug this back up just hand tight. That's going to be great. I'm going to dump this out. I'm going to write down my 3.25 liters that I've saved. Dump this out just so I have a clean pitcher to work with. And then we're going to start removing our 10mm hardware around the pan. I'll show you a trick that we're going to leave the ones in the most forward side on just loose so that we can kind of tilt this and hopefully try to catch most of it so we have, again, a rough measurement. This isn't going to be exact, but just to give us an idea. So 3.25, just going to put it down our catch pan. Hey, welcome to F-Zero's Cafe, Cars and Coffee. This is what we're going to be serving this year. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start with the, I like to call the annoying 10mm bolts on the forward side of the pan. You're going to see me using an extension with a swivel socket and then a small 10mm on the end that we're going to feed through these small holes in the subframe. What we're going to do though is we're going to break them free, but we're not going to fully pull them out. I'll show you that trick in just a moment. All right, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but they're sticking out quite a bit. That'll give us some wiggle room. And we're going to use those to leverage the pan at an angle so that we can only drain the fluid from one side versus spilling all around the pan. With those free, we can work on removing the rest of the 10mm bolts around the pan. There's a total of 11 of them. I'm going to leave this far left corner one closest to the exhaust here on as well. I'm going to see if I can kind of get an angle out of this, mainly just because we're trying to catch the fluid and measure it. If I wasn't trying to measure it, I would just open both of these up and let it spill vertically down to the catch pan. One of our transmission bolt pans does not want to come out. There's a lot of corrosion in it. So I'm going to put a little bit of penetrating fluid on it to see if we can get it out. There's no reason why it should be bound up like that unless someone's been in here before and didn't do a great job at installing it, but we don't know that for sure, unfortunately. So we're gonna let this do its thing for a few minutes and come back to it. All right, 10 days later, we have all of our hardware out with the exception of the 3 10mm in the back and one in this corner. I say back, I mean towards the side of the engine. The literal back is over here. We have one in the corner just so that we can kind of pivot this pan at an angle to catch some of our fluid. I'm going to position my catch pan in my pitcher. And then we're going to use a small pry bar without obviously damaging the surface of either item, just to kind of break that free and see what kind of mess we can make here. That should be almost all of the fluid in the pan. Obviously you saw I was using my hand to kind of scoop out a little bit more so I can A, control my catch, and B, not really make a mess, at least try not to make a mess when I fully pull it off. So we're gonna head over to the forward side of it, or the side of the engine, and remove those final 3 bolts. And then we'll give you a look at what the filter looks like in there. Now we're gonna go ahead and get these 3 forward 10mm off. I'm gonna level out the pan so there's no stress on the bolts, at least not as much. I'm going to switch over to a open-ended wrench, same 10mm size, just to kind of get these going. Maybe if they weren't so crusty, you might be able to just get them out by hand, but my hand's too big and these are too crusty. Now we can take this one forward bolt out and pull this pan out, finally. All right, we're going to set this pan off to the side. We'll take you to the bench in a minute to clean it up. But next, while I have you here, let's proceed and remove our transmission filter. We have 4 10mm bolts holding in this filter. I'm going to start with the forward ones and then work my way to the back. It may be held in place still by the O-ring, so just be prepared to catch it and or see a little bit more fluid come out, either or. So again, 10mm socket. I'm just using a 10mm on my 3/8 ratchet. Once you break it free, you should be able to get it by hand. Make sure not to mix these up with your oil pan hardware if you're not replacing it. They are a different size. With the 4 10mm bolts removed, we can go ahead and pull our oil filter off. Transmission filter, technically it has oil in it. Call it what you will. I don't know what's gonna come out of here, but I'm gonna keep the, ooh, yeah. With the filter out, we can go ahead and add up how much fluid we've caught versus how much we've spilled. Just kidding, we can't measure the spilled amount, but that'll give us a rough idea of how much we need to put back in. We'll clean up our work area, and then we'll clean up our pan and start reassembling stuff. So let's get started on that. All right, my good people, we're at the workbench. We're gonna clean up our transmission pan really quick, clean up the magnets, and install our new gasket. So let's get started with that. Pretty straightforward. We're gonna go ahead and remove our transmission pan gasket first. Go ahead and toss that over to the side. Once you've compared it to your new one, make sure it's the right one. Then we're gonna go ahead and pull out our 4 magnets. While I clean up the magnets, I'm gonna set the pan over to the side over here so it's out of our way. And use some shop towels to get the initial stuff off. These are in pretty good shape considering the car only has 107,000 miles, and this job may or may not have been done before, so they're not terrible. The pan itself is pretty clean, actually. There wasn't really anything floating in there. Not a lot of clutch material in there, so it's great. Now that our pan is clean, we can go ahead and reinstall our magnets. While we have the pan out, we're also going to reinstall our green fill tube, so let me grab that. We're going to feed it from the bottom, just the same way we removed it. We're going to thread it in with our 5mm hex, just by hand, just until it stops. The second it stops, it's good. This is what it's going to look like from the inside. With that done, we can install our new pan gasket. It only goes in one way. It keys itself into the grooves of the pan itself. With this good to go, we're going to head back to the transmission side of things. Make sure our old filter came out with the old O-ring. If not, we'll pull that out. We'll get this situated, and then we'll clean up the area for the pan, and we'll reinstall the pan. We're back under the Q7. I'm looking over everything before we start reinstalling anything, and you can tell right away that the O-ring stayed in the transmission, so it's always important to look these things over before installing new parts. We have the old O-ring off. While we have all this space and this view here, we're going to go ahead and just clean up the surrounding areas of where our pan gasket's going to seal. You can use some shop towels if you have a little bit of crud like we do here in these beautiful New England vehicles. You can use a small piece of Scotch pad. You're not trying to resurface anything. You're simply taking off any buildup from road grime that may build up on the edges here. So it's nice and light. You give the new gasket a fighting chance at sealing right. With that, we can take our new transmission filter. You can dab your fingers into some of the residual fluid here. Just lubricating the O-ring a little bit so it can go in easier. And now we can take our pan and line it up to our bolt holes. You can also see where the O-ring sits on the transmission side of things. Get it lined up as best as you can. Get some of the hardware started. Again, these are 10mm bolts. The key is definitely to start the 2 forward ones closest to the O-ring. That way everything kind of seats in properly. And then proceed with the 2 back ones. Once we snug all 4 of these 10mm bolts up, we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 7 foot-pounds or 10 Newton-meters, whichever you prefer. Now with that situated, we're going to grab our pan and we're going to set it up into place and set a couple bolts just kind of around the perimeter to hold it up into place, and then we'll get them all snugged up by hand. We're going to go ahead and install our pan now. We're going to put a 10mm bolt on each end. And while we were off camera, we were doing a little bit of homework. You'll notice I'm installing some fresh hardware. We're going to link that in the kit as well. So by the time you see this, this will be fully updated. You'll have fresh transmission pan hardware, you'll have a fresh drain plug, all that good stuff. This is why we do these videos. We improve our kits oftentimes as we're shooting. We figure out new ways to do things or upgrades, you name it. Now I'm just going to go ahead and feed in the rest of the 10mm bolts. Now that these are all snug up, we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 7 foot-pounds or 10 Newton-meters. At this point, our pan is fully situated. We're going to go ahead and start filling it. We're using our AT105 adapter, which we covered at the beginning. This is a CTA tool. We're just going to go ahead and thread it into the pan itself. It's going to bottom out probably when it hits the green fill tube inside. We have our pressure pump already filled with 8 liters of fluid to start. I'm going to go ahead and fit that on there and then thread it down to lock it into place. All right, that should be pretty good there. Now we're going to go ahead and pressurize our pump. Now we've built up some pressure in our pump tool. We're going to go ahead and start filling by opening up the valve. We're at about 20 on the gauge, just for reference. Just a soft start to see, A, make sure we don't have too many leaks or any leaks at all, and B, no need to fully force in the fluid here. I'm going to close this up and pump up our pump a little bit more. At this point, we are about 8 liters of fluid in. We're going to go ahead and remove our fill tool and our adapter. And then from there, we'll let it spill out. We'll cap it temporarily, and then we'll hop inside the vehicle and get it up to the proper temperature so we can set our level fluid correctly. At this point, we did our initial fill. We removed the fill tool and the fill adapter, and we let it come down to a small dribble like it is right now. What we're going to go ahead and do now is reinstall our drain plug temporarily. So we're not going to torque it down or anything. I'm actually going to use the old one just so I don't ruin the seal on the new one. I'm going to go ahead and feed that in here. Just snug it up by hand. And then we're going to lower the vehicle down. We're going to hop inside of it, turn it on, and we're going to check what our current temperature is, and then we're going to get it into the correct fill range for the temperature. That's going to be between 35 to 45 degrees Celsius. So let's hop on inside and get that taken care of. All right, my good people, we are in the Q7. We're going to go ahead and use the Autel. You can also use VCDS to do what we're about to do right now, but the goal is to check the temperature of the transmission and bring it up to spec so we can get the appropriate fill level. You don't want to get it too hot either, because then the fluid is going to overexpand, rendering the whole thing useless, and you're going to have to wait for it to cool down again. So we're going to monitor the whole thing. Grabbing our key, we're just going to put the Q7 into the first key position. Not going to turn it on or anything just yet. I'm going to take the Autel and use the diagnostics feature. We're going to click on Audi, of course. You do the same thing with a Cayenne or with a Touareg. Just select the appropriate model. Read the VIN. I'm going to select 2011 SUV, 3-liter TDI. From the diagnostic menu, we're going to go through the control unit, and we're going to go to the transmission control module, or option number 2 specifically. From there, we're going to find the live data for the ECU. That's going to give us the information we're looking for. So we're going to click on that and find temperature, transmission fluid temperature, 34 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to go ahead and split the difference here. We're going to turn on the rig, and we're going to let it get to about 40 degrees Celsius. And while we do that, we're going to be shifting the Q7 through the gears. Obviously, we're not going to move anywhere, but we're going to leave it in each gear for about 5 seconds. And I'm just going to repeat that throughout the process of me waiting for this to reach 40 degrees Celsius. So let's get to it. We're nearing 39. We're almost there. And 40. Now let's go ahead and hop back underneath and check our fluid level. I'll show you how to do that. All right, my good people. At this point, we hit 40 degrees on the computer. We're going to go ahead and remove our fill plug, so nothing's coming out. So what that means is we need to add a little bit more fluid. So I have Mike up top. He's going to be cycling it through the gears while monitoring our temperature. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more liters to the transmission, or to the pump, and we'll fill it up into the trans and see how much more it takes. At this point, we have the vehicle in park. We're still between 35 and 45. We're at 43 Celsius right now. We're going to go ahead and remove our fill tool. You can see it's a little over full. We're going to go ahead and let it come down to a dribble, and then we'll plug it up. You always want to check the fluid level when it's in park. You don't want to cycle it through the gears, and you don't want it in gear. You want to have it in park. So at this point, it's getting a little warm. We're going to go ahead and plug it. We're going to shut off the vehicle, and we're going to let it get back down to about 40 degrees Celsius, and then check it one more time. Right now we're at 42 degrees. We're going to let that come to a dribble. Then we're going to cap this back up and torque it down to 12 foot-pounds or 16.2 Newton meters, whichever one comes first. Now we can go ahead and torque this down to 12 foot-pounds or 16.27 Newton meters, whichever you prefer. Beautiful. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall our shield. Again, we're going to feed it from the front, opposite of the removal. Get the shield on and then this plate over it. And we're going to grab our 8 10mm screws and just work our way from the back forward. Boom, baby. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty straightforward job. Doesn't really take a lot of tools, just definitely takes a little bit of time and a lot of shop towels. Keep in mind, again, the 35 to 45 Celsius degree range is very important. You don't want to work under that or over that, as your fluid is going to change and it'll give you an inadequate fluid level, as well as keeping the vehicle itself level so that you have the correct reading when you're filling this up. If you like this DIY, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this video and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.